Today we are going to learn how to paint water in icons. I present to you here just the object of the work. I suggest you paint a variation of colors on a sheet, trying to reproduce this water, which can also become smoke or rather strong variations of colors. With red below and gray above, this will be a way to review previous courses. We worked a lot on the puddles and therefore, we are going to kill two birds with one stone by studying how to paint water. We are also going to remember all the steps necessary to cover the surfaces. Then we'll try to do a representation of waves, so it'll be up to us to see if we're going to do something more tumultuous or calmer. The advantage when you learn to paint these waves is that in fact you also learn to paint beards and plants at the same time. You see, it's kind of always the same technique. A beard like this, for example, might as well, if painted with blue, represent a waterfall. So, by learning to paint water in fact, you learn a technique that will be used for many other elements in the icon. So, to make water into an icon, there is a secret which is very simple. Above all, you must not want to use a thin brush. That is to say, the first thing we will do is paint strips with a large brush. I remind you that it is really an advantage to be able to use a thick brush, because it has a much greater amplitude to be able to vary the thicknesses. You practice first on a small sheet by crushing your brush. When you arrive in the middle of your stroke, you thus make 5 strips close to each other. Leave a small space between the strips, and practice this. Calligraphy. Use red ochre or yellow ochre, both are fine. When you have found the right brush, you can then use a stronger paper. Ideally watercolor paper, always using the same technique. Start by tracing 6 areas with yellow, more or less square. You can simply reproduce this very small graphic, 5 waves, but the first in the middle is larger, the others progressively less wide and less long. There can be small variations, and sometimes try a little wider strokes. Sometimes a little thinner. This will really be the basis for learning how to paint waves. So, as we had already seen in previous lessons, I suggest you first put a base with pure egg. I therefore remind you that it is very important that this first egg layer is only justified because we are working on a sheet. If you are working on an icon board, do not put this layer. I incorporate in this first layer a little bright yellow. It will give a little more shine to the colors that will be superimposed. This is where we will begin to differentiate between the different painting techniques. I am applying a glaze here. That is to say that the purpose of a glaze is to cover the surface, but not specifically to give depth and substance, which in the case of bright yellow would be useless because it is much too light. If you want to give your layer depth, you need to work with a pigment that is more opaque. Now you just simply fill your surfaces with this glaze. You obviously have to go only once, otherwise you risk removing your pattern. So it's pure egg, just to get us closer to absorbing an icon board. which obviously absorbs a lot less than a watercolor sheet. When it's really dry, we'll be closer to the surface of an icon. We will continue to lay puddles as we go. So now we're going to do the next step. So these are the famous puddles. I will try to do them well in front of you. On the first surface, I'm going to paint a first puddle of yellow ochre water. It's quite usual. The paper absorbs a lot of paint in the first layers. Normally on an icon board the absorption is much less. Simply, you pass a puddle of yellow ochre over the entire surface. Watch out for small drops that escape when laying a puddle. So, you can try on other surfaces, other color choices, other pigments. For example, incorporate a little bit of red ochre into your puddle. Using red ochre probably means you're going to have a darker surface. Unless you puddle it with white. See that? Despite everything, we always try to let the motif appear through transparency. So, another solution would be to put a brighter yellow, a slightly dirty yellow. There, I may be pulling a little too much on the paint. We are reducing my ability to render a puddle. And you do all the surfaces like that, and then we'll see for the second puddle. Next, you remember we always try to vary the colors when layering. So here I'm going to make a first puddle with some green. You remember that the green pigment is an extremely coloring pigment, so always try to break it up a little. I broke it with a little blue, a few other yellows perhaps too, why not? A tiny bit of white, but very little. So see, when I want to better measure the amount of pigment I'm using for a mix, rather than putting it directly into the mix, I put it a bit off first. I control the amount of this better that way. White is always a color that should be used very sparingly. Here, when I have the color I want, then I can dilute it more widely. I don't forget to put egg in a proportion of a third. Here, I have my first puddle. So, I immediately apply this green color on my surface. I obviously take care too. Make a sufficiently transparent puddle. Normally it should already really be acquired in your work to be able to reveal not only the initial work, which here consists simply of these 5 small lines made with yellow ochre, but also which gives depth to the surface, and you do like that a color of your choice, varied. It's up to you to choose in each of the small surfaces that you have prepared. This is where we are going to make a first pass to light up these strips, which are slightly wider strips, so which will constitute, if you like, this effect which will make it look as if it were water, a little bit. It's obviously a graphic effect. The first thing we're going to do is obviously choose the color of these waves. Precisely. So, generally, obviously, it's more towards the blues that we orient ourselves. What is always important is to put here, if you're going from basic to dark, as is the case here, a little bit of white in your mixture to opacify it. So it's not just for the to illuminate, it's also to make it opaque. So when you have chosen your color, well, all you have to do is iron over the waves that you still have too. See up here from below, to be able to start raising the light of your water. Once your first pass is dry, the idea if you will, then of course there are many ways to represent water. It's up to you whether you want a more opaque or more transparent result. Here, we start with a formula that would be, let's say, very transparent. You simply take your mixture that you used to make the first pass, and the idea afterwards is to iron by incorporating a little more white in your brush, too. Simply iron on the two ends of your strip. Here, I'm not hiding from you that the mixture may already be a little lively, but at the same time you will see that generally the white tends to become more and more transparent, so don't worry too much. At first it's sometimes a little opaque, and then as it dries, it becomes a little more transparent. When the base of the line width is very wide, like this one for example, you can put a third line in the center. That way you really boost the brightness in the center of the band. Here I'm going to put a second one, and here also one in the center, then here just a small one in the middle. Afterwards, when you have that, the rest, it becomes more a question of aesthetic choices. We could already say that like this, water is evoked in a very transparent and light way. Maybe you need to put a little bit more white in your mix, like I just did, and add a last little sparkle. So, you make sure to favor the center of your band. See, I'm not even going to put it on all the tapes. Just until the end, maybe just on the side here, but not after. There, you already have a first way of representing water in a very transparent way. You can also increase the contrast in a much more opaque way, so that's a choice. And so, we can also, I'm perhaps going to show you very slightly, signify with a tint a little bit darker all the same, the outer contour of each of the waves. I'm going to take a tiny bit of red ochre with a bit of black in it to show you that. Do not forget in these cases too, squeeze your brush well, so that above all there is not too much tint of colors and opacity. So it is up to you. Once you've done the test, you could make a very small darkening line to mark the gap a bit. It's up to you to see the intensity you want to give depending on the whole icon. Let's say that here already, it is more than enough. So here is our work. So these 6 surfaces which have each been worked to bring up a little water. So in its simplest form, we have simply by making lines. You see a little variation here. So sometimes the contrast was a little stronger. Sometimes it's a lot softer. Sometimes it's a little more contrast and more color. There's a blue here that stands out more. There you go. So there's a little variation in the colors too. You see that working with cold blue or gray on a background, for example, which is brown like this one, gives an unexpected result, but which is interesting for representing water. So, it's up to you to do your little tests according to the documents you find and according to the colors you want to use.